If you're limiting yourself to data in a single spreadsheet, you're making your life harder than it needs to be. And that's because you can easily import data from one spreadsheet to another very seamlessly, and it will update automatically. And you can do this by using the import range formula. And honestly, this has come in handy so many times in my day job. For example, let's say we work for a t-shirt company, and we have a spreadsheet that has some of our orders right here, and another spreadsheet that has some more of our orders right there. And we want to combine these two spreadsheets into a single list on our main page, but we want it to be dynamic. That way, if anything gets added later on to those tabs, it will still update. So we'll use equals import range, and the first thing we need is a URL, and the second thing we need is the range string. So we'll go to the first spreadsheet, and we'll copy the URL, and we'll go back to our main spreadsheet. In quotes, we'll paste that URL. Then after a comma, we need the range string, and the range string is just what location of that spreadsheet you're pulling from. So back on the other spreadsheet that we're pulling from, we need to find the tab of the data that we want to pull. In this case, it's data. So we'll put the name data and then an exclamation point to indicate that it's a tab. Then we'll put the range that we want to import. In this case, I want to include everything except for the headers and go all the way through the end of column E. So I'm going to put A2 through E. So to set this up, we're going to go back to our main spreadsheet. And then after that comma, in quotes, we'll put data, exclamation point, A2, E, end quote, close parentheses. Now, once you press enter, you'll see this reference error. That's because you need to allow access to allow the different spreadsheets to sync together. And once you do, you'll see all the data from the other spreadsheet listed in this spreadsheet. And you can see everything is included, so we're all good for import 1. Now we're going to go to import 2 and do the same exact thing. So we're going to go to cell A1 and type equals import range. And then we need to go to the second spreadsheet, copy that URL, inside quotes, paste that URL, put a comma, and it has the same name, same information, so we'll put data, exclamation point, A:E. Allow access, and everything's imported. And this time we included the headers. In reality, it doesn't really matter because we're going to select specific data in our formulas anyways. Now let's test out the sync. So I'm going to put test in the bottom of the list. And when we go to the main tab, you can see that test automatically flows through. So everything's working perfectly when it comes to our ranges. And it works the opposite as well. So if something is removed from one of the spreadsheets you're pulling from, then it will flow through to your main spreadsheet and be removed as well. So now that we have both of those ranges, let's go ahead and combine them into one single list. If you haven't seen my video on combining ranges, go back and watch that for more context. But we'll put equals open brace, select the range that we want to include, put a semicolon, select the second range that we want to include, close the curly brace, and now we have everything stacked on top of each other. But since we only have fixed ranges, if we add any more data later on, that's not going to work for us. Now we can extend those ranges to include the rest of the rows in the tab and just filter out the blanks. But before we do that, I'm going to show you how to build this formula without having to use those additional tabs. So to avoid additional tabs, we're just going to build the import range formula directly in this formula. So after that open curly bracket, we'll put import range, and we'll paste the URL between quotes. Then after a comma, we'll put our range string, which was data, exclamation point, A2:E. And we'll put that between quotes as well, and then close out the parentheses. So that will give us our first range that we're combining. And I'm going to copy this entire import range formula, delete what we have here for the second range we're combining, and paste that. And if we remember, everything was the same with the exception of the URL. So I'm going to go to the second spreadsheet we're pulling from, copy that URL, and then overwrite the URL that we currently have in there, and paste it with the new one. And since the range string is the same, it will work exactly like we want it to. Now if you notice, everything in the first spreadsheet is there, but the second spreadsheet is missing. In reality, we just have a whole bunch of different blanks, so the second spreadsheet doesn't show up until past row 1000. And that's because there's 1000 rows in the first spreadsheet. So to combat this, we're going to type equals filter, open parentheses. We'll copy the entire formula after that, then put a comma and paste the formula. And what we want to do is filter out anything that's blank, but you can only filter off of a single column. So instead of having A2:E, we're going to change A2:A for each of those ranges. Then at the end, we'll put not equals to quote quote and close out the parentheses. And we got an error message because I actually changed one of the import ranges instead of the filter ranges. So I'll change this one back to A2 to E and change the filter range to A2 to A. So now you can see that everything's working properly, and we see the first spreadsheet stacked right on top of the second spreadsheet. So now let's test it out. Let's go ahead and go to our first spreadsheet, and I'll put test just underneath. And I'll make sure it's in column A since that's where the filter is at. And you can see that test flows through automatically into this spreadsheet. And it's right between where the first spreadsheet and the second spreadsheet are combined. So that's how to use import range into different tabs, as well as to use it within the formula and filter out all of the blanks. So now let me show you some shortcuts. Instead of going to the URL, I'm going to simply use a smart ship. So I'll type @ and then put the name of the first spreadsheet that we're trying to pull from. Then I'll do the same exact thing for the second spreadsheet. I'll make the column a little bigger to see the full name. And even though it's more formatted, there is a link that's behind it. So instead of pointing to the specific long URL, you can delete that and simply point to the cell that contains the URL instead. So in the formula, I'll delete the URL that points to the first spreadsheet, and I'll select H2 instead. And then I'll do it for the filter portion as well. I'll delete that URL and select H2 instead. And as you can see, everything is working the same exact way because the formula is reading it as if it's the URL. Now for uniformity, I'll go ahead and do the same exact thing for the second spreadsheet. So I'll delete both URLs and put H3 instead. So now the formula went from being incredibly long and hard to read to being a little bit more manageable. And if you wanted to, you could do the same kind of thing for the range string. So the range string itself is data, ! And then the range. So in I2, I'm going to type data. And in J2, I'm going to put the range. I'll put A2:E. And I dragged this down in the video, but you don't actually need to since we can reference the same cell. I'm going to insert a column just to the left of column I and put equals join. I'll put the delimiter as quote, ! Quote, comma, and then select those two cells. And we used an exclamation point as the delimiter since we need to have an exclamation point after the tab name. So now that we have the range string in the format we need it, we can simply go into the formula and reference that cell that contains the range string instead. We're going to do this for the import range values, but if you remember, for filtering, we can only filter based off of a single column. So we need to change the range string to A2:A instead. So I'm going to select everything we have, drag that down one, and simply change A2:E to A2:A. And now that that range string is updated, we can simply reference that cell instead with the new range. So I'll update both of these filters. And now you can see that instead of it having a whole bunch of different lines with a whole bunch of different text, everything's nice and neat, and it's only referencing cells, and it's super easy to read. So filtering is one way, but that's not necessarily the easiest way. Instead, my favorite thing to do is use query. In the query formula, it functions somewhat like SQL. So right after the equal sign, I'll put query. Then after my combined import range, I'll put a comma. And in quotes, I'll put select star, where col1 is not null, end quote, close parentheses. So now we don't need to have that extra range string, that's only the specific column. And we only need the two import range combined ranges instead. And since it's a query, we can query only specific columns if we wanted to. So instead of select star, which means select all, we can say select col1, col2, and it's only going to retrieve the first two columns of that data set. Now, obviously, this doesn't do us much good because it doesn't actually give us the data other than what was sold in the unique ID. So I'm going to change that back to an asterisk to see everything. But the point is that you can do a lot of different things with the query function just like normal. So now you're a master at import range, and it doesn't matter where the data set lies because you can bring it into your spreadsheet. Like and subscribe for more.